Washington. And again, with regards to the situation between Israel and Lebanon, with Hezbollah involved as well, there has been an immense amount of fatalities, immense bloodshed, and of course so much destruction as far as living quarters are concerned. We've seen videos of apartments being blown up. So even if there is a ceasefire, even if this lasts for 1 or 2 years, the reparations involved may last a lot longer. So indeed quite tragic. But yes, if some sort of a ceasefire is reached, all shooting is stopped, this would be, of course, very fortunate. Back to you in the studio, Ruby.
Roshan, thanks for that update, but please don't go far. We're coming back to you very shortly. Now, a United States trade delegation led by Chief Negotiator Brendan Lynch is going to be in New Delhi for 4 days of talks aimed at finalising an interim India-US trade agreement. The negotiations come amid growing urgency to reach a deal before a new US tariff regime is expected to take effect in July. Officials say both sides have made significant progress, with US Trade Representative Jamison Greer and Ambassador Sergio Gore recently indicating that only a small portion of the agreement remains to be completed. However, differences persist over issues including agriculture, energy purchases and other US demands that India views as sensitive. New Delhi hopes a trade deal will help restore investor confidence and provide greater certainty for economic and business planning. Now back to you, Roshan. Roshan is our correspondent joining us from the newsroom. What more can you tell us about this trade deal set to be finalised?
Essentially, when it comes down to trade in 2026, with the surprise attacks on Iran from the US from February 28th this year, essentially what has happened to the entire global framework and landscape of trade is that it has shifted immensely, and no one really knows how to essentially circumvent what has happened. We've seen countries essentially set up their own trade deals to secure energy and food. Fertilizers have been hit as far as being exported through the Strait of Hormuz to countries as well. So as far as agriculture is concerned, that's been hit. And the repercussions are just global in the sense that because the Strait of Hormuz essentially used to transfer so much oil all around the world, now trade deals between nations need to be happening fast, and that's why this trade deal has some sort of an urgent sort of label on it, and it is happening in New Delhi, the capital of India, to essentially secure the future of both of these nations. Now let me tell you more. A high-level American delegation led by U.S. Chief Trade Negotiator Brendan Lynch has landed in New Delhi to commence intensive 4-day trade consultations with Indian officials running from June 1st to June 4th. These talks are specifically tailored to hammer out the legal framework of an interim reciprocal trade pact. The Indian side is being spearheaded by Darpan Jain, additional secretary in the Department of Commerce, with both nations eager to capitalize on momentum generated earlier this year. Like I mentioned, there is a profound sense of urgency which is overshadowing these meetings due to a strict ticking clock in Washington. Government sources indicate that India is highly motivated to seal the deal because the United States is poised to roll out a sweeping new tariff framework before July 24th. This upcoming American policy is expected to replace previous reciprocal tariffs, meaning negotiators have a narrow window to lock in preferential terms for bilateral trade before the broader regulatory landscape shifts. With regards to tariffs, of course, that affects businesses, how they do business, how they make profit. So, of course, this will be closely watched over the next few days. I'm very sure that businesses will be locking in, looking for news on how to keep making profits with regards to these tariffs and their trade deals with the U.S. and vice versa. Now, the foundational groundwork for this week's sprint was laid back in February when both global powers issued a joint statement outlining the initial phase of a proposed bilateral trade agreement, or BTA. A major breakthrough already on the table includes Washington agreeing to slash its proposed tariff rates on Indian goods from a steep 50% down to a highly favorable 18%. That's a 32% cut. Furthermore, the U.S. has offered to waive specific economic duties linked to India's ongoing procurement of Russian oil, providing massive relief to Indian exporters. With regards to oil, like I just mentioned, this year we've seen quite the crisis with regards to oil, with 20% of the global oil supply essentially being shut down or in shambles as far as how to move forward with getting oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in return for these substantial concessions, New Delhi has committed to eliminating or deeply slashing import duties on a broad spectrum of American industrial goods and agricultural products to reinforce its status as a premier strategic partner over regional economic competitors. India has also signaled its intent to aggressively scale up total bilateral trade with the U.S. to a staggering $500 billion over the next 5 years. This week's face-to-face sessions in Delhi will focus on resolving final sticking points regarding market access, customs facilitation, and economic security alignment. Now, because the underlying American trade landscape has evolved dramatically since the preliminary February framework, like I mentioned, both teams are walking into these sessions prepared to fundamentally review and tweak previously agreed upon clauses. Lynch and Jain are scheduled to review detailed reports generated during the previous in-person summit held in Washington back in April to iron out last-minute friction points. Observers note that the success of this 4-day sprint will largely hinge on how flexibly both sides handle complex non-tariff barriers and customs bottlenecks, elements critical to ensuring the interim pact survives scrutiny back home. So, of course, we will track this as the week goes on. Back to you in the studio, Ruby.
Roshan, thanks very much for that update. Now we move to our next story. Some updates there are coming from US President Trump. He has said that artists should drop out of and cancelled the US Freedom 250 Festival after a number of artists pulled out of the event. In a sharp response to the withdrawals, Trump said cancel it, fueling fresh controversy around the high-profile celebration. The festival is designed to be a major part of events commemorating the 250th anniversary of the United States. However, the exit of several performers has raised questions about participation, organisation, and the event's future. Organisers have not yet indicated whether the festival will go ahead as planned, be modified, or be scrapped altogether. The developing dispute has triggered wider debates over politics, culture, and the role of public figures in national celebrations, drawing attention far beyond the festival itself. Back to you, Roshan. What more can you tell us about this celebration? Freedom 250, set to be cancelled after a large number of artists have pulled out.
Right, Ruby, when we think of the United States, maybe in 2026 as news anchors ourselves, it's very easy to essentially think of and allude to the Strait of Hormuz, the Iran crisis, but maybe let's go back to the 2000s or even the 90s. We think pop culture, we think blockbuster movies, and we definitely think of artists like Vanilla Ice singing Ice Ice Baby, and he's still interested in essentially representing America at the festival. But of course, Trump essentially not getting very good feedback from artists who want to support him celebrating 250 years of American freedom and America's essential birthday here of 250 years of being independent. He has found it extremely unfortunate in the sense that he's embarrassed that some artists have pulled out, for lack of a better word. Let me tell you more. U.S. President Donald Trump has aggressively called to scrap a high-profile concert series intended to anchor Freedom 250, the national celebration marking America's 250th anniversary. Taking to his Truth Social platform, Trump declared, "Cancel it," after a wave of prominent musical acts abruptly pulled out of the festival lineup. The president blasted the remaining itinerary as overpriced and boring, expressing fierce frustration that the entertainment portion of the semi-centennial milestone was fracturing. The controversy erupted after a succession of mainstream performers, including country star Martina McBride, rock frontman Bret Michaels of Poison, R&B icons, the Commodores, and hip-hop veteran Young MC, officially canceled their appearances. The artists uniformly claimed they were victimized by a bait and switch regarding the nature of the celebration. Many stated they signed on under the impression that Freedom 250 was an entirely nonpartisan, unified cultural event, only to later discover heavy political undercurrents and direct White House positioning. Now, Trump was furious over the withdrawals and retaliated online by labeling the departing musicians third-rate artists and claiming they had simply developed the yips ahead of their scheduled performances. He dismissed their absences by boastfully declaring himself the #1 attraction anywhere in the world. I'll just take a pause there, Ruby. Essentially, when we think of America as well with regards to Trump and excusing the Iran crisis and the Middle East crisis and everything else that's happened with regards to Trump politically, as far as Venezuela is concerned, Cuba as well, Trump is also a bit of a showbiz superstar, having his own show and, of course, having been in movies like Home Alone. And that's why he might have declared himself the #1 attraction anywhere in the world. He has also added a characteristically bold claim that his political events regularly draw vastly larger audiences than rock icon, and get this, Ruby, Elvis Presley did during his prime. Instead of moving forward with the compromised musical festival, Trump instructed his representatives to immediately explore replacing the concerts with a massive localized political rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., dubbing the proposed alternative the America is Back rally. Trump specified that only great patriots would be invited to what he promises will be a wild celebration. While a few artists like Vanilla Ice and Milli Vanilli still intend to play, maintaining that celebrating America's birthday transcends politics, the broader entertainment showcase appears fundamentally derailed. Essentially now, this public fallout introduces severe logistical and political complications for the broader multi-week Great American State Fair schedule on the National Mall, which Trump was originally slated to personally inaugurate on June 24th, while the White House-aligned Freedom 250 organization scrambled over the weekend to pivot a distinct, official, and entirely bipartisan congressional body known as America 250 has quietly chosen to distance itself from the drama. The Congressional Committee is moving forward with its own parallel, strictly nonpartisan 250th anniversary events focused primarily on historical exhibitions and independent Independence Day celebrations in legacy cities like Philadelphia and New York. And that's all I have for you. Back to you in the studio.
Roshan, thanks very much for that update there. We now move to Asia, to Sri Lanka, where a deadly crash has shocked the country after a suspected drunk driver ploughed into a soup kitchen, killing at least 6 people. Authorities say the vehicle struck individuals gathered at the community food distribution site, leaving several others injured. Emergency responders rushed to the scene to treat the wounded and transport victims to nearby hospitals. Police have taken the driver into custody and launched an investigation into the incident. The tragedy has sparked fresh concerns over drink driving and road safety, with officials vowing a thorough probe into the circumstances surrounding the crash. Now we move to a deadly explosion that has struck one of South Korea's major defense manufacturing facilities, leaving at least 5 people dead and 2 others injured. The blast occurred in the morning at a plant operated by Hanwha Aerospace in the city of Daejeon, about 150 kilometers south of Seoul. Emergency authorities said the explosion was reported at around 11 a.m. local time, triggering an immediate response from fire and rescue teams. Officials from the Daejeon fire headquarters confirmed that 5 people lost their lives in the incident, while 2 others suffered injuries. The condition of the injured has not yet been disclosed. According to preliminary information cited by South Korea's Yonhap news agency, the explosion is believed to have occurred inside the factory. Authorities have launched an investigation to determine the cause of the blast and whether safety failures may have played a role. Hanwha Aerospace is one of South Korea's leading defense companies, producing a wide range of military equipment, including artillery systems, weapons, missile components, aerospace technologies. The incident has raised concerns about industrial safety at strategic defense facilities as investigators work to establish exactly what led to the deadly explosion. Now we move to Latin America. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has rejected the results of the initial presidential election count, raising fresh concerns over the country's electoral process. Petro said he does not accept the preliminary results and called for greater scrutiny of the vote tally. His comments come as election authorities continue to process ballots and verify results. The dispute has sparked political debate across Colombia, with supporters and opponents closely watching developments. Officials have urged calm while the electoral review process continues. The controversy is expected to further intensify political tensions in the Latin American nation. Let's listen in.
El presidente de la República acaba de pronunciarse de manera clara sobre una de esas situaciones. Hay un desfase que queremos verificar en torno al censo electoral. Y ese no es cualquier desfase. Estamos hablando de 885,000 personas o cédulas.
And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello, my name is Ruby Barlow and welcome to The World Report. Let's take a look at some headlines from this hour. US President Donald Trump has reportedly asked for edits to the deal with Iran, extending negotiations further. Reportedly, the edits relate to assurances regarding the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear program. Iran's foreign minister says Iran will not agree to any deal unless Iranian rights are secured. Iran denies reports of the resignation of President Masoud Pezeshkian. These reports cited a loss of authority within the Iranian system. However, the Iranian administration has refuted these. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered a deeper incursion into Lebanon despite a 6-week ceasefire. Israel has recaptured Beaufort Castle 26 years after troops pulled out of the UNESCO heritage listed site. Over 1 million Lebanese have been displaced since the beginning of the conflict roughly 4 months ago. Oil prices increased more than 2% as Israel pushes into Lebanon further despite the ceasefire. US crude futures rose 2.71% to 89.73 a barrel, with Brent futures rising 2.37% to 93.28 a barrel. The World Health Organization reports that 4 nurses and a lab worker recover from their Ebola infections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, there has also been a suspected Ebola cases being investigated in Brazil and Italy after travellers returned home from Africa, with one of the 2 Brazilian cases confirmed as negative. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he wants to press on with securing peace talks with Russia before winter. Talks coordinated by the United States have stalled since the start of the Iran war roughly 4 months ago. Presidential elections in Colombia will head to a second round after no candidate failed to win a clear majority in the first round. The two candidates will be Iván Cepeda, who is considered the leftist candidate and ideological successor to the current president Gustavo Petro, and Abelardo de la Espriella, who is considered a far-right pro-Trump candidate. Following the Parisian football team Saint-Germain's second consecutive Champions League win, more than 200 are injured and one person dead in Paris, the Interior Ministry of France confirms. The figure has reignited debate over street violence in France. Now we start in the United States. The US Central Command says it has carried out self-defense strikes on Iranian radar and drone command and control sites in Goruk and on Qeshm Island over the weekend. CENTCOM said the measured strikes took place on Saturday and Sunday in response to what it called aggressive Iranian actions, including the shooting down of a US MQ-1 drone operating over international waters. The incident marks a fresh escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran. We're joined by Craig Peacock, Chief Advisor at the Kijaku Japan Advisory, and he's joining us now from Tokyo in Japan. Craig, welcome back. Thanks very much for joining us today on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to have you on the channel. Craig, we've heard also this morning about further strikes, self-defense strikes carried out on Iranian radar and drone command control sites in Goruk and Qeshm Island over the weekend. But of course, we did hear statements about negotiations developing between the United States and Iran as well. Craig, are we seeing these strikes as an indication that these negotiations aren't going very well, or are they indeed just a progress as part of this war as strikes continue? Will we see strikes continue as negotiations drag on, or will we see a reduction?
Well, thank you, Ruby, and thank you. It's very good to be here. This is, of course, a significant escalation, but it's being presented by Washington as a measured defensive action rather than the opening of a wider war, I think. CENTCOM's language is very important. It says the strikes were in self-defense, and they followed the shoot down of the MQ-1 drone over international waters, but there were no American casualties. That's, I think, designed to show resolve while avoiding the appearance of uncontrolled escalation. So the choice of targets matters. Radar sites, command and control facilities, and a ground control station and one-way attack drones are not symbolic targets. They are part of the operational architecture, I think, that Iran uses to monitor, threaten, and potentially attack US forces and maritime traffic around the Strait of Hormuz. So by striking those systems, the US is saying we're not just responding to the loss of a drone, we're degrading the network that made the threat possible.
Mm-hmm. Craig, please don't go far. We're coming very soon back to you. Now, we have heard today as well in West Asia, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described the capture of the strategic Beaufort Castle as a dramatic shift in Israel's campaign against Hezbollah as the conflict in Lebanon continues to escalate. In a video message following the seizure of the medieval fortress, Netanyahu said he had ordered the military to deepen and expand its hold over areas previously controlled by Hezbollah. The capture of Beaufort, which overlooks large parts of southern Lebanon, marks a significant advance in Israel's ground offensive. Meanwhile, Hezbollah claimed responsibility for attacks on Israeli positions in northern Israel, while air raid sirens sounded across several communities. The expanding offensive has triggered fresh evacuation orders across South Lebanon. Lebanese officials say thousands remain displaced as airstrikes continue to hit the region. International concern is also growing. France has called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, warning against what it described as Israel's deepening occupation of Lebanese territory. Now back to you, Craig. Of course, the last time Israel had control of Beaufort Castle was during their occupation of southern Lebanon 26 years ago. We see now the recapture of this UNESCO site as well. What does this show for the conflict, how it has progressed so far? Do you think we will see further pushes by the IDF into southern Lebanese territory? And what does it also show symbolically as well? I mean, it's a UNESCO heritage listed site, but it's a castle. Does this have some sort of symbolism in this conflict?
Well, yes, the capture of Beaufort is symbolically powerful because of the site's history and geography, Ruby. It sits in southern Lebanon above key terrain and, of course, has very, very deep resonance from previous Israel-Lebanon conflicts, as you mentioned. I think Benjamin Netanyahu is presenting this not merely as a tactical game, but as proof that Israel has moved from containment to initiative against Hezbollah. And his phrase, dramatic shift, is meant for Hezbollah, but also for Israeli domestic opinion. We mustn't forget that. The military question is whether Beaufort gives Israel durable operational advantage or whether this becomes just another exposed forward position in a widening Lebanon campaign. Israel says the operation is aimed at dismantling Hezbollah launch infrastructure around Beaufort. But once Israel forces move deeper into Lebanon, the risks of escalation, attrition and international backlash really do increase significantly.
Indeed. Craig, you mentioned the domestic perception there in Israel as well. Can you expand a little bit further on that? How will the Israeli public perceive this perceived push further into Lebanon? Are they tired of this war so far, of this restart of tensions with Hezbollah? How do you think it could affect these upcoming elections that we do see as well? Of course, there is a new political force that is challenging Benjamin Netanyahu, albeit a combination of the current centre-left and centre-right. How do we see this latest capture of Beaufort Castle, but also the push north into further regions of Lebanon, affecting Israeli public opinion?
Well, I think it's important to remember here, Ruby, that there's a diplomatic cost. European leaders as well are already criticising Israel's deeper incursion into Lebanon and calling for restraint. That matters because Israel can win tactical military points while still losing diplomatic space. The longer this extends, the more it looks less like deterrence and more like a broader regional campaign, and that applies very much domestically as well. Beaufort may be a dramatic image, but the real test is not whether Israel can take ground in Lebanon, it's whether it can avoid being drawn into another open-ended Lebanon war. And I really doubt that the Israeli people themselves want that.
Craig, please don't go very far. We're coming very much back to you very soon. We now move south to the Gaza Strip. Israeli strikes have once again hit the region, with medics reporting that at least 2 people were killed after a strike targeted a cafe near Gaza's seaport. Several others were wounded in the attack, which occurred in a busy coastal area. Emergency crews rushed to the scene to treat the injured and recover victims. The incident comes as Israel continues its military operations across Gaza amid the ongoing war with Hamas. There's been no immediate comment from Israeli military on this strike. The latest attack is likely to add to growing international concern over the humanitarian situation in the enclave. Let's listen in.
هذا المخيم يعد منطقة آمنة، منطقة مكتظة في السكان. جايين اثنين جايين طاشين على المينا، جايين يشموا، لأنه المينا تعد المنطقة الوحيدة اللي الناس تتنفس منه. قامت طيارة الاستطلاع بضربهم في صاروخ واحد، يعني تنتف شقف يعني هيو انت تطلع يعني شقف، والثاني نقدر نقول الله يرحمه لأنه وضعه حرج. أين وقف إطلاق النار؟ إحنا بنحكي للعالم وين وقف إطلاق النار، وإحنا كل يوم في عنا دم، كل يوم بنودع بعض.
Craig, back to you. Some latest strikes there, despite the ceasefire that is in place between Hamas and Israel. Of course, also attracting international attention, just as it is for in the north with Lebanon, as you mentioned previously. Of course, international attention has decreased in this area as the Iran war has started over the last 4 months. We've seen the centre of gravity move towards the Strait of Hormuz there. but of course still a very polemic issue, the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Craig, what do we see coming for the next couple of weeks, months for the Gaza Strip? Of course, there is an increasing move by Israel to take further territory. It's been reported up to 70% now is the order that's been given by Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, also attracting international criticism, diplomatic criticism. Do you think that we could see a calm in the region, as Iran has stipulated in their negotiations with the United States? They've asked for a stop for tensions between Hezbollah and Israel, and also, of course, Hamas and Israel as well. If we do see this negotiated deal come to fruition, do you think we will see a stop for these hostilities with the Iranian proxies in the region as well, considering the fact that Iran has put it on the table, but Israel, the United States' junior partner, is very reluctant to see any inclusion of this in a negotiated deal?
Well, let's hope so, Ruby. I mean, this Gaza seaport cafe strike is deeply damaging for Israel's international position, because the target was a crowded civilian space. Medics say at least 2 people were killed and 12 people wounded. Israel has not immediately commented, of course, which leaves the humanitarian narrative to dominate the early reporting, and that's damaging for Israel. It has to be. And particularly in light of the things that you mentioned that were put on the table as conditions. The broader problem is that these strikes are occurring despite the ceasefire framework, and that has not truly stopped any of the violence. So since the truce came into effect, around 900 Palestinians have been killed in Israel airstrikes, and 4 Israeli soldiers have died in militant attacks. So those numbers underline really how fragile, partial and politically hollow the ceasefire has become.
Do you think we'll see, unless there's some further statements put out by the Israeli Defense Force, do you think we'll see further international criticism, given the fact that the humanitarian narrative has dominated the reporting around this strike so far?
Well, for Israel, the stated strategic objective remains the dismantling of Hamas and the prevention of militant regrouping of Hamas. But each strike in a civilian environment, especially somewhere like a cafe or a seaport area, strengthens the perception, the international perception, that Gaza's civilian population is trapped in a war without any meaningful protection. That perception is now very central to the global criticism of Israel's conduct. Israel itself may argue that targeting militants is what they're doing, but when the visible result is dead civilians at a cafe, the strategic argument becomes much harder to sustain.
Indeed. Craig, what else can we expect to see coming out of the Gaza Strip at the moment? There's been further encroachment by the Israeli Defense Force. 70% is the figure that I have seen. But of course, also, as I mentioned before, Iran has asked for calm in the region. Do you think that we could see any retaliatory attacks by Hamas for these latest strikes? It's been reported that their military capabilities has basically been wiped out by Israel so far, and potentially retaliatory attacks by Hamas would threaten the ceasefire deal that's being negotiated by their partner, Iran. Do you think that we could see any retaliation there?
That, I think, Ruby, is always a possibility. The more Israel expands operations, the more it risks appearing not as a state defending itself on specific fronts, but as a state engaged in some kind of permanent regional military management. The key distinction, I think, Ruby, is this. Israel can achieve battlefield success, But battlefield success is not the same as a strategic resolution, and it's got to invite retaliation. Beaufort may give Netanyahu a powerful image, but Gaza strikes may satisfy only the immediate security logic. By doing that, it neither solves the underlying political problem and both the risk, but it does have the risk of isolating Israel diplomatically, and I think we're seeing that happening.
We are also seeing as well, in the past week there was the addition of Israel to a blacklist by the United Nations regarding sexual violence in conflict zones as well, Craig. Of course, one of many measures that has drawn criticism from Israel. They've said that they're going to cut relations with the head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, but also supports investigations and criticism by NGOs into Israel's conduct over the last couple of years. Craig, how are these international court cases against Israel progressing? Of course, there is international criticism, but without any substantial legal moves, criticism remains just that, criticism, just comments. How are the progressions for the cases that we're seeing in the International Court of Justice, for example?
Well, the progression within the International Court of Justice is not proceeding in the way that probably a lot of the critics of Israel would like it to see happening. And going back to what you were saying, the criticism of the conduct of the Israeli Defense Forces is quite damaging. We saw last week the very real and quite raw accounts of Australian people that had returned back to their country after being allegedly abused by the IDF. I think one of the other damaging things that has emerged as well is we saw that there was a list of countries that would immediately arrest Netanyahu should he appear at their borders, which is, of course, not a feasible scenario, but it does provide a very damaging image again. So at the moment, rather than actual progress, I think we're seeing very damaging information coming out as an image of what Israel is actually doing.
Mm-hmm. Craig, thanks very much for joining us on the show. It's always a pleasure to discuss these issues with you. We now move to the markets. Global markets are keeping a close watch on West Asia as investors weigh the impact of rising geopolitical tensions against the continuing boom in artificial intelligence. Now, Asian share markets opened higher on Monday, supported by strong demand for AI-related stocks. However, optimism was tempered by a lack of breakthrough in talks between Washington and Tehran aimed at easing the Gulf crisis and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global energy shipping route. Adding to market concerns, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Washington is prepared to resume attacks on Iran if diplomatic efforts fail. At the same time, Israel has pushed deeper into southern Lebanon in its campaign against the Iran-backed Hezbollah group, fueling fears of a wider regional conflict. The uncertainty has kept pressure high on energy markets, with Brent crude climbing near $93 a barrel and US crude rising above $89. Analysts say even if tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz resumes, oil prices may remain elevated as global inventories are rebuilt and damaged energy infrastructure across the region is repaired. For now, investors are balancing AI-driven market momentum against the risk of further escalation in West Asia. Now we're joined by Sharad Kohli, a senior economist who's joining us from New Delhi. Good morning, Sharad. Thank you very much for joining us today on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to chat with you. Now we've heard here about some movements in the market, oil prices rising slightly with news of latest developments coming out of West Asia, some further strikes, no clear resolution to negotiations at this stage. Sharad, what's your evaluation of the movement of the market over this past week? What could we see in these coming days? Will we see it hover around the prices we see now if no negotiation is reached soon, or will a lack of negotiations lose investor confidence and perhaps push prices even higher? What's your take?
Well, good morning, Ruby, to you and the viewers. I think the cloud of uncertainty very much looms over the markets around the world. You know, the yes and no game which is happening in Strait of Hormuz. Well, one fine day you come to know that there could be a peace deal signed soon. The next day that goes out of the window. The following day again there is some hope. So this is just happening so repeatedly that the market is becoming more and more uncertain. It doesn't know where to go. Well, I must tell you here at this point that I have a feeling that the Wall Street in the US is currently being artificially pumped by a lobby, because US is in war. US economic data has come to be very poor, barely 1% or 1.5% growth, but I don't know if that is real too or not. In that situation, for US markets to be hitting new records over the last few weeks seems very, very startling to me. So I have a feeling there's a lobby in the Wall Street which is just trying to maintain Wall Street, because 65% of the people in the United States are involved in the stock market. So obviously there is an attempt to keep the investors and electorate happy because of the forthcoming November midterm elections. Otherwise, I think the global economy, American economy, they are all not doing well at this point of time because of crude oil prices being elevated for some time. As you rightly said, even if Strait of Hormuz were to open today, you know, I have a fear that the prices may never go down back to the original levels where they were before the war, which is about $65–70. I really don't feel the crude oil price are going to go back to that level, because as you rightly said, you know, some of the infrastructure has been very, very majorly damaged. It will take a very long time for the infrastructure to come back and the supplies to come back to normal. Having said that, I think $80, maybe $75–80 may become the new normal, which again would be very high, especially for the economies which are facing pressure of inflation, especially the economies which are dependent on imports largely, which includes India, Korea, Japan, Vietnam. A lot of economies are heavily dependent on import of crude requirements. So I think the situation as of now is very uncertain. And the war clouds are still looming large, although President Trump doesn't seem to be in the mood to go ahead with kinetic war. But the economic war, which is currently, which the world is witnessing at this point of time, seems to be more devastating for the economies, and it's gradually and slowly seeping in, to the economies, and inflation fears are growing. I also have a fear that the central banks around the world may decide to hike the interest rates. So the hawkish approach of the central banks around the world may be back, which would impede the GDP. The global GDP as of now is not very good. The global debt is about $350 trillion, whereas the global GDP right now is just about $110 trillion. So there's an over-leveraged global economy, which is getting worse because of the prevailing situation in Strait of Hormuz, Ruby.
Sharad, if we are seeing a perhaps artificial inflation of how well the US economy is actually doing, as you mentioned earlier, what does this indicate to you about what's going on inside the United States? And if indeed we were to see this perhaps artificial inflation of how well the American economy is progressing, what would we see if that appearance was taken away? What would we see happen to the market then?
Well, the markets obviously would come crashing down, because once the realities come to the surface, well, American economy, $40 trillion is the debt simply on the American economy at this point of time. Inflation is 3.8, although I feel real inflation is far more than that. The common man or the middle class in the US is reeling under inflation. Their groceries bills have gone up, their overall food bills have gone up, the rentals have gone up, and the salaries haven't been going up. No new jobs are being created. I have a feeling, Ruby, that some of the numbers coming from the US are not as trustworthy as they used to be. We used to talk about this for Chinese economy, where the numbers, there was a bit of an opaque environment where global media wasn't able to peep into the economy. I have a feeling that a similar thing is happening in the US. The numbers are not real, and when the real numbers surface, I think the world is going to see US in a much more devastating economic condition as it is visible to a common man right now. So I think things are not looking very. I don't want to sound pessimistic, Ruby, but then the situation around the world is emerging, which is leading the world into a recession, is what I feel as an economist.
Very grim indeed. Sharad, thank you very much for joining us today on the program. Always a pleasure to hear your analysis. We now move to Latin America. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has rejected the results of the initial presidential election count, raising fresh questions over the country's electoral process. Petro said he does not accept the preliminary results and called for greater scrutiny of the vote tally. His comments come as election authorities continue to process ballots and verify those results. The dispute has sparked political debate across Colombia, with supporters and opponents closely watching developments. Officials have urged calm while the electoral review process continues. The controversy is expected to further intensify political tensions in the Latin American nation. Let's listen in.
El presidente de la República acaba de pronunciarse de manera clara sobre una de esas situaciones. Hay un desfase que queremos verificar en torno al censo electoral. Y ese no es cualquier desfase. Estamos hablando de 885,000 personas o cédulas.
And that is all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates coming to you from around the world.
आज का भारत सिर्फ आगे नहीं बढ़ रहा, भारत खुद को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जा रहा है.
Together with my friend Prime Minister Modi, who I was pleased to see again last night, we took on our bilateral relationship and raised it to its highest level ever.
We need new answers. That's why we are coming to India.
And as a citizen of Nepal, India's closest neighbor, I feel a deep sense of pride and optimism seeing this stride.
in the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Rashan Gidwani and you're watching The World Report. Let's take a look at the top headlines for this hour. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launches ballistic missiles at a U.S. airbase. The strike retaliates against an earlier American attack on a southern Iranian island telecoms tower. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomes Myanmar's sanctioned President Min Aung Hlaing in New Delhi. The two leaders hold talks to strengthen historical and civilizational ties. A suspected World War II bomb explodes underneath a stilt house in an Indonesian fishing village. The powerful blast kills 5 people and leaves at least 19 others injured. A massive accidental explosion of mining explosives rocks a rebel-held village in Myanmar. The deadly blast kills dozens of local residents and injures over 70 others. Heavy downpours threaten to delay emergency search efforts in Laos. Rescuers race against time to locate 2 people who remain missing inside a flooded cave. Israeli forces take control of the historic Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu declares the victorious advance a dramatic shift in the ongoing offensive. An Israeli military attack strikes a seaport cafe located within the Gaza Strip. Local medics confirm the assault kills at least 2 people at the scene. President Gustavo Petro publicly denounces the initial results of the election. He formally refuses to accept the preliminary tally released by officials. And now here are the top stories for this hour. First things first, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it has struck a United States air base it claims was used to launch an attack on a telecommunications tower on Sarik Island in southern Iran. According to Iran's Mehr news agency, the IRGC's aerospace force said it carried out a retaliatory operation hours after the reported strike, claiming that all designated targets were successfully destroyed. The IRGC also warned that any further action would be met with a response different in scale and nature, saying responsibility for escalation would fall on the United States. The statement comes as tensions continue to rise near the strategic Strait of Hormuz, a key global shipping route. And now joining us live to tell us more is Hadza Min Fadli, Rabi Associate Professor from the Department of International Relations from the Islamic University of Indonesia, joining us live from Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Let's dive right in here with regards to these retaliatory strikes and, of course, what's happening as far as the negotiations are concerned between the U.S. and Iran. How does this strike, as far as a retaliation is concerned, essentially fracture some sort of a resolution that the world may be counting on? Tell us more.
So I think we have to look into the timing as well. Iran and a Shia community at large will be facing one of the most holiest month in their calendar, that is the Muharram. And along with Muharram, there will be a celebration of Ashura, which is the martyrdom of Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. And after that, following that celebration, would be the Arba'in pilgrimage to Karbala. So I think Iran would like to strengthen their position and also to increase their leverage in terms of defending whatever they want to push during the process of negotiation. And so far as I could observe, Trump has been trying to back down for quite a bit because he's quite anxious about the result of the midterm election. He has been hearing a lot from his advisors not to have more provocative statements, to be very careful in engaging with related parties in this negotiation so as not to provoke them into unnecessary conflict. So I think what we will see is this increasing more assertive Iranian position. But this doesn't always translate to a more militarily aggressive standing, because I think that Iran would not seek any form of serious aggressive stance militarily against United States and its allies, but rather trying to impose their position. And this strike against United States telecommunication tower serves as a reminder and a warning that Iran is still holding the higher place in this negotiation. That is my opinion so far.
Right, sir. When we think of President Donald Trump with regards to all the notions regarding the peace negotiations with Iran are concerned, do you feel like most of them are true or not, in the sense that it's quite hard to keep up based on patterns that Trump has shown as far as consistency with regards to actions being carried out against Iran, especially when we see reports of attacks? What's your take?
So I think if we are trying to look into recent dynamics, Trump is somehow quite showing indecisiveness, a lot of indecisiveness on how and what to do with Iran. I think last week he also said that it was a wrong decision to attack Iran, and but he doesn't want to give Iran a higher leverage in this negotiation. This is something that would eventually cause him huge damage when he returned back to United States, bringing out the result of negotiation to the American public. All of this unnecessary conflict has brought not only damage but also a direct economic consequences to many Americans living hardly through these months. And I think he wants to come out victorious, but he cannot do so because he didn't really bring any credible sanction or any credible pressure against Iran. And well, contradictively, we can see that Iran is now gaining more and more leverage, and more countries are trying to seek a middle ground that would actually able to sustain this status quo, which would provide Iran with more control toward Hormuz Strait. While this is something that America doesn't want to have, I think America would be slowly forced to accept this reality in a way that they would ensure that this mechanism wouldn't end up in the isolation of American security interests and the Gulf countries especially. So we have to look into that dynamics in next few months to come.
Right. Sir, whilst we have you on this topic, let's dig a little deeper. What's your take with regards to Trump's incentive or intention with regards to Iran, in the sense that, do you believe they're selfish and self-centered on his rise to further prominence and power, or do you believe they rest entirely on the fact that Trump is keen on wiping out nuclear capabilities for the good of the entire world. Which one is it, or is it a mix? Tell us more.
Well, it's rather a mix. I think that part of it would be his ideological conviction, his worldview, but part of it is also his interest, and also a larger part of American policymakers' interest to make sure that Iran wouldn't be a nuclear power that would threaten Middle East. But if we are looking into the outcome of this war, which has been happening for at least 3 or 4 months, we can see that America is only able to cripple Iran militarily. But I think that they wouldn't be able to wipe out entirely Iranian military facilities and capabilities, because Iran has this ability to ensure that their military facilities and also their military capability could not be recorded, could not be taken into some sort of the intelligence records. Of course, there has been some efforts by intelligence from America and Israel, obviously, to take out some important military data. But I think that Iran has been doing some good job in keeping out some of their sensitive military records. And I think that we can say that America won this war tactically. They have significantly reduced Iranian capability to attack, especially American military facilities in the Gulf countries. But if we are looking into a long-term strategic outlook, we cannot say that America is winning, especially if this war is ending up in Iran gaining more control and domination in the Strait of Hormuz and also in the Gulf of Persia in general. Yeah, that's my take.
Sir, please stay with us. We'll be right back with you. Next up, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has hosted Myanmar's military-led leader in a highly watched meeting aimed at strengthening bilateral ties. The engagement comes despite international sanctions and widespread criticism over Myanmar's political situation following the military takeover. Both sides discussed cooperation in border security, connectivity, and regional stability. India has maintained working engagement with Myanmar's military authorities, citing strategic and security interests in the border region. The visit is being closely monitored by global powers given the diplomatic sensitivity and sanctions regime surrounding the Myanmar leadership. And now, joining us live to tell us more is Veena Sikri, former Indian diplomat, joining us live from New Delhi. Ms. Sikri, thank you so much for joining us. When it comes down to Myanmar and India and these relationships that essentially will only be strengthened due to this meeting, what more can you tell us about the past history between Myanmar and India that has led both of these nations to come to a meeting point right now?
Well, you know, India and Myanmar, we share historical civilizational linkages, very strong border-to-border contacts. The people for the millennia have been moving back and forth over the border. Their ethnic ties across the border between India and Myanmar. As you know, we have a long 1,638-kilometer border. And so, in fact, for some time, for many years, there was free movement up to a certain number of kilometers on each side of the border. But we do know that in the last 5 years, Myanmar has suffered grievously ever since the military coup at that time done by the person who is now the president, General Min Aung Hlaing. He's now the president of Myanmar. And this has led to problems, certainly problems for India as well, because there's been raging internal conflict in Myanmar along India's border with Myanmar. And in many cases, it is the NUG or other ethnic armed organizations who control various points along the border with India. So that causes a lot of difficulty because, as you know, that when you have such a long land border, and we have a maritime border as well with Myanmar, the security issues are very important, are very very grave, and we have to deal with the government of the day to solve these problems on a day-to-day basis. We also want to strengthen our links with Myanmar in terms of trade, in terms of connectivity. There's some very important India-ASEAN connectivity projects which go through Myanmar as a very critical country. So, you know, Myanmar and India's links fall into three categories when we look at India's foreign policy: our neighborhood first foreign policy, our Act East foreign policy, which guides India's relationship with ASEAN, and our Mahasagar, the holistic approach to the Indian Ocean region and for security and growth for all countries in the region. So I think that in all these, taking all these aspects into account, India is interested directly in speaking to the newly elected president of Myanmar, and this is his first foreign visit, and he's already had very important discussions with the External Affairs Minister. Dr. Jaishankar has called on him on Saturday, and yesterday the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval has called on him. Today he will be meeting the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and we do see that as the difficulties emerge, you know, there's always a speculation as to how much territory of Myanmar is actually controlled by the government of Myanmar. And we've seen that as these difficulties emerge, the president has called for a dialogue. And we don't know what the response to that is going to be. But we do know that the new Chief of Armed Forces of Myanmar, they've started their, attacks in three parts of Myanmar: in the north, in the Kachin state, which adjacent to China, in the east, the border adjacent to Thailand, the Karen region, and in the west with the Chin and other regions of the Sagaing division in the border with India, in the Myanmar border with India. I think so. India, of course, is in touch with all groups in Myanmar, and we certainly hope that there can be a strong internal dialogue which will resolve the conflict and bring peace to this troubled region, because the last 5 years they've had a very, very tough time, internal displacement of people, the economy has gone down, and India would like to revive links and bring stability to Myanmar through economic connectivity, and we hope that this visit will contribute in this direction.
Right. Madam Sikri, one more question. When it comes down to Myanmar, you essentially mentioned just now in your response that it is vital to interact with the government of the day. But of course, when it comes down to Aung Hlaing, essentially there are sanctions against him. There's quite a controversial past that precedes his visit in India. Do you essentially believe that this will benefit the government of India based on the neighborhood approach and mandate that you just mentioned, or will it in any way, shape or form essentially have an impact on India that may be controversial as well? Do you believe that there's a spillover, or do you essentially see this as a all beneficial visit? And with that in mind, can you essentially enlighten our viewers on some of the quite possible agricultural exports coming out of Myanmar, for example, amongst other sectors, which may be beneficial to India? What's your take?
Oh, definitely. I do think that, as very much as part of our neighborhood first foreign policy and also Act East policy, we have to have a dialogue with our neighbors. It is very important. There are difficult times. We have difficulties with many neighbors. But as long as, with some neighbors, it is very clear that if they are state-sponsored terrorism, then a dialogue is not possible unless the state resists the sponsorship of terrorism. But if there is this, in this case, it is definitely the result of internal conflict, and we feel that the internal conflict should end. It should be an internally resolved issue, and India is very, willing to talk to the president of Myanmar on this count. I think, as I said, the president himself has called for a dialogue, and I think to push all sides to have an internal dialogue is a very important factor. You spoke about agricultural exports. Yes, certainly we have agricultural exports from Myanmar into India, very important ones, lentils and so on. And if agricultural exports are strong, it only helps the farmer in Myanmar, and it helps the farmer to have a steady produce and to gain economically from his farmers' activities and from exports to India. So all in all, we want there to be economic stability and political stability within Myanmar. I think that, in Myanmar, the one big issue that they have been grappling with all these years is federalism, because the NUG, the National Unity Government, the ethnic armed organization, they all are talking about greater autonomy for themselves. And I think in this case, India's example of our strong federal structure, our constitutionally mandated federal structure, which gives rights to the states and gives rights to the center as well, it has worked well. It is a strong example of how individual states and provinces are prospering on their own. They are attracting foreign direct investment on their own, and yet their connectivity and interconnectivity with the center gives them a big boost in their dealings with foreign countries and in their internal growth as well. So I think this is a pattern that Myanmar could well benefit from. And I do know that even before the 2021 coup and many other places, we have always encouraged Myanmar parliamentarians to come to India, to visit our parliament, to understand India's federal structure, and to see to what extent this could benefit all sides of the conflict in Myanmar to come to a peaceful settlement. And this is important because, this 5 years of conflict along the border between Myanmar and India and the internal conflict in Myanmar has really disturbed the situation in Northeast India. Illegal activities are up, drugs imports and exports are up, and there's a lot of difficulties for the northeastern states, whereas earlier it was a very peaceful border for 15 years and economic prosperity on both sides. So obviously, even in the interest of the states of Northeast India, we are very keen that we have the visit of the president of Myanmar and explain to him. And as I've said, he's interested, I think, in getting to a situation where Myanmar can face a stable, peaceful, and democratic future.
Right. Madam Sikri, thank you so much for your time and joining us here on NewsX World. Much appreciated. Next up, a suspected World War II ordnance has exploded in Indonesia, killing at least 5 people and raising concerns over remnants of old military explosives still lying unsafe. Authorities say the blast occurred when the device detonated under unclear circumstances, with local residents among the dead. Emergency teams were deployed to secure the area and remove any additional dangerous materials. Officials have launched an investigation into how the ordnance was discovered and what triggered the explosion. The incident has sparked fresh warnings over handling of unexploded war-era munitions. Now, joining us once more to enlighten us on the situation is Hadza Min Afadli, Rabi Associate Professor, joining us from the Department of International Relations from the Islamic University of Indonesia in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Sir, thanks so much for joining us once more. When it comes down to this situation, essentially, what is being done on the ground to make sure that it does not happen again? Are there cleanup efforts involved? Tell us more.
Well, this is not an isolated case, and in this 4 or 5 years, I think there has been some cases of the immediate explosion of unexploded ordnances, especially in eastern Indonesia, particularly in 1940 to 1945. This particular region of East Indonesia, not only in Papua but also in several parts like in Maluku and also in Sulawesi and parts of Java perhaps, have been influenced and also affected by these cases of UXO or unexploded ordinances. And usually it is the one who are innocents, the normal citizens who are working in their agricultural fields and also working as fishermen, as in this case or in Biak. They are the ones who immediately discovers, and when they discovered it, it became something that is dangerous to them. And unfortunately, in the case of Biak here, the UXO that was being found within the fisherman village was exploded. And so far, the government has been trying their best to map out some of the territories which has been part of the battlefront during the years of the war in World War II. But this effort is much more difficult in Papua. Why? Because the military presence in Papua is really a sensitive topic, since we still have clashes between the Papua Liberation Movement and also the Indonesian military. So an extensive military presence, especially in civilian area, would be considered as a threat to the local population and also a provocation for the populace, because they would see that the presence of military as something that would ignite resistance and rebellion, especially for those who are supporting the cause for independent Papua.
Right. Mr. Fadli, thank you so much for joining us and giving us those insights. Much appreciated. Next up, a devastating explosion in northern Myanmar has left dozens dead and wounded in one of the worst recent disasters in the country's conflict-torn Shan state. Rescue teams told at least 46 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a massive blast ripped through Kong Tat village in Nam Kam Township, near the Chinese border. Some reports suggest the death toll may be even higher. Among the dead are at least 6 children, including a 1-year-old, according to local responders. The explosion also caused widespread destruction, damaging around 200 homes in Kang Tat and another 100 in a nearby village. The Taang National Liberation Army, which controls the area and has been engaged in fighting with Myanmar's military junta, said explosives used in mining and quarrying may have detonated, triggering the blast. The group described it as an accidental explosion. However, local accounts and earlier reports indicate the scale of the devastation was extreme, with eyewitnesses describing a massive crater, shattered homes, and panicked residents searching for family members amid the rubble. The incident has raised fresh questions about the storage and handling of explosives in conflict zones, where safety oversight remains limited and civilian communities often bear the brunt of deadly accidents and ongoing fighting. Next up, a race against time is underway in Laos as rescuers continue searching for 2 villagers still missing inside a flooded cave in the Sai Sombun province. The operation suffers a major setback after heavy monsoon rains raised water levels inside the cave, forcing divers to temporarily halt their search. Rescuers also report a critical drainage pump has been broken down, making access even more difficult. The search comes days after 5 other gold hunters are rescued alive after being trapped underground for more than a week. Divers now believe the 2 missing men could be sheltering in an unexplored section of the cave. Authorities say the search will resume as soon as conditions improve. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ruby Barlow and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of our top headlines from this hour. US President Donald Trump has reportedly asked for edits to the deal with Iran, extending negotiations even further. Reportedly, the edits relate to assurances regarding the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear program in Iran. Iran's foreign minister says Iran will not agree to any deal unless Iranian rights are secured. Iran denies reports of the resignation of President Masoud Pezeshkian. Reports cited a loss of authority within the Iranian political system. However, this has been refuted by senior figures. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered a deeper incursion into Lebanon despite a 6-week ceasefire. Israel has recaptured Beaufort Castle 26 years after troops pulled out. Over 1 million Lebanese have been displaced so far since the beginning of the conflict, roughly 4 months ago. Oil prices rise more than 10% as Israel pushes forward into Lebanon. US crude futures rose 2.71% to 89.73 a barrel, with Brent futures rising 2.3% to 93.28 a barrel. World Health Organization reports that 4 nurses and a lab worker recover from their Ebola infections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, there has also been suspected Ebola cases being investigated in Brazil and Italy after travellers returned home from Africa, with 1 case in Brazil confirmed as negative. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he wants to press on with securing peace talks with Russia before winter. Talks coordinated by the United States have stalled since the start of the Iran war roughly 4 months ago. Elections in Colombia will head to a second round after no candidate failed to win a clear majority in the first round. The 2 candidates will be Ivan Cepeda, who is considered the leftist candidate and ideological successor to current President Gustavo Petro, and Abelardo de la Espriella, who is considered a far-right and pro-Trump candidate. And finally, following the Parisian football team Saint-Germain's 2nd consecutive Champions League win, more than 200 are injured and 1 person dead in Paris, the Interior Ministry of France confirms. The figure has reignited debate about street violence in France. We start now with some breaking news. The United States says it has carried out military strikes against Iranian targets in the city of Guruk and on Qeshm Island, describing the operation as a self-defense response to what it called aggressive Iranian actions. In a statement posted on social media, US Central Command, or CENTCOM, said the strikes were launched after Iran allegedly shut down an MQ-1 drone operating in international waters. CENTCOM said US forces targeted and destroyed Iranian air defense systems, a ground control station, and 2 one-way attack drones. According to the US military, the targets posed a direct threat to commercial and military vessels transiting regional shipping routes. The strikes mark the latest escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran as the region continues to face heightened security risks amid the wider conflict involving Iran and its adversaries. Now we are joined by 2 guests, Dr. Satoru Nagao, Fellow at the Hudson Institute of Tokyo, and Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School. Starting with you first, Dr. Nagao, we've seen some strikes here, the latest strikes in this conflict between Iran and the United States. Now, how may this affect these negotiations underway between Iran and the United States? There's been reports of Donald Trump asking for edits to this deal. How could these latest strikes affect the negotiations so far?
In this case, this kind of self-defense attack is on surface. This is action reply to the Iran's aggressive behavior, but at the same time, such kind of the attack could be the one part of the coercive diplomacy. Coercive diplomacy is diplomacy, negotiation, but sometimes using the limited military force. That is coercive diplomacy. So Iran hasn't agreed, and the US intensified the pressure to Iran. But at the same time, this negotiation faces a basic problem. Indeed, the demand is zero-sum. Zero-sum is one side gets zero and another side gets some, all of it. So in this case, the Iranian nuclear development program, the Iran want to continue and the US want to stop it. In this case, zero or some. Only these two exist. That's why even if the negotiation of the ceasefire has happened, they are seeking 6 days extension of ceasefire to negotiate about this nuclear issue. This means that this is not the solution in the long run. This is just extension of the ceasefire. So that's why in this case, anyway, this kind of the negotiation face difficulties. So even if some kind of the military pressure is intensified, still this is not a complete solution in this case.
Mm-hmm. I now want to bring in our second guest into this discussion, Professor Veselin Popovski. He's joining us now from Portugal. Professor Popovski, thanks very much for joining us for this discussion. Now we've heard about some further strikes targeting Iranian targets in the city of Goruk and also on Keshem Island. The United States has described this operation as self-defensive in response to aggressive Iranian actions. Professor Popovski, over the last week we've seen varied statements coming from the United States, from Iran, also varied statements coming out in media as well from both countries. And of course we do see these latest strikes as well, potentially threatening progress in negotiations. Do these strikes indicate to you that these negotiations are going badly at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have much progress, as Mr. Satoru Nagao said, because both sides keep rigid, and in a zero-sum attitude, there won't be much of a progress. But let me add also that, in a sense, both sides are very corrupted. United States and Iran are two regimes that are very, dictatorial. They are not listening anybody else. They are very much self-obsessed with their own greatness. They would like to impress the domestic audience that they are the only rulers that can deserve that government. And for that matter, it is very difficult to have any negotiations if both sides are anti-democratic, let's put it this way. And yes, the strikes will continue. They are not self-defensive, I fully agree. It was United States and Israel that went into the war first and foremost on February 28. Iran can argue self-defense, obviously, and with much more reasons here rather than United States. So it's absolutely irrelevant statement that US strikes are self-defensive. They are not. Every international lawyer will smile and ridicule that. So you are right, there is not much of a progress on negotiation table, and accordingly both sides try to exercise brutal force, but that doesn't lead to anywhere. And usually in those circumstances both sides lose. It's not win-win, it's a lose-lose situation. United States already lost its status in the world. Somebody even called that great power suicide, and I like that expression, a great power suicide under Donald Trump over the last year and a half. And Iran is also suicidal. Its policy doesn't lead anywhere. They will lose more and more facilities and even nuclear enrichment, uranium and all of that, that they cannot do that exactly because they will face more strikes and more hostilities and more global isolation. So it's very interesting to monitor a situation where both sides are losing by not negotiating.
Professor Popovsky, Dr. Nagao, please don't go far. We'll be rejoining with you very shortly. We move now to some further strikes against Kuwait. Kuwait says its air defense systems are intercepting hostile missile and drone attacks as security forces respond to an emerging threat. Officials said defense units were actively engaging incoming targets to protect the country's airspace, though no immediate details were provided on the source of the attacks. Authorities have not reported casualties or damage so far, but the situation remains fluid. The development comes against the backdrop of escalating tensions across the Gulf region, raising fears of a broader conflict. Kuwaiti officials say they are closely monitoring the situation and have urged residents to follow official safety instructions as air defense operations do continue. Now back to you, Dr. Nagao. Some further strikes against Kuwait. However, we have not got confirmed information about where these strikes may be coming from. Of course, in this broader war, there's been several threats against these Gulf nations, Kuwait as one of them, not only militarily, but also economically as well. Not only with the blockage to the Strait of Hormuz, but also to the tourism economies of these Gulf nations. Now, we do see further strikes, of course, hitting Kuwait as the Kuwaiti Defense Force to try and engage these incoming targets. How can we expect to see these Gulf nations fare in the next couple of weeks as negotiations do go on? Is it in their best interest to see a weakened Iranian state, even if that involves further weeks of conflict, or are they keen to see a negotiated settlement and a cease to hostilities?
In this case, Iran attacked countries which hasn't attacked Iran. So that's why such kind of the attack against Kuwait or UAE or Saudi Arabia isolated Iran diplomatically. But in the Iranian decision making, they do not care because Revolutionary Guard care about military, not diplomacy. So that's why they are conducting such kind of attack. But this is diplomatically suicide, I believe. So that's why if such kind of situation continue, which country will face the damage? I believe Iran face more severe, I think. Iran is losing the military, Iran is losing diplomatically, something like that is happening. But still, Iran can survive, they believe, because they believe the religion is source of power for them. Because in the Iran-Iraq war or Iran revolution, every time their belief is the power they believe. So that's why they will not back down. So that is a big problem indeed.
Professor Popovsky, going back to you now. We have seen these strikes against Kuwait, not confirmed where they're coming from right now. Potentially Iran, potentially other armed groups in the region as well. How will Kuwait be dealing with this situation at the moment? Of course, they do have American military bases in Kuwait, but they are also very dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. How do you think the Kuwaiti government will be dealing with not only these latest strikes, but the next couple of weeks, the outlook for the war ahead?
Yes, not only Kuwait, but also the other Gulf states are also victims of that. They experience strikes on their own facilities. And obviously they need to strengthen their own defenses. By the way, including with Ukrainians are very good in drone detection and gunning down. And Vladimir Zelensky was also visiting those countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates including, offering the know-how, the knowledge of how to defend the territory from such strikes. Generally, the Gulf countries will probably reduce their reliance on United States long term. Everybody should reduce reliance on United States. As I mentioned earlier, it's a superpower gone into history under Donald Trump. And unless there is a new president in Washington in a few years that could somehow revitalize that global role that United States used to have in many parts of the world. Otherwise, as we see everywhere now, including in the Far East, Japan and South Korea, in Europe, NATO, now in the Gulf countries also, look for alternatives in terms of their defense systems. Not only United States, but many other countries can offer that. So it will be a very different world, and somehow this war in Iran suggests there will be a major reconstruction of the world politics, with no longer United States being a reliable partner, and new coalitions may form. I see some potential, for example, between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Pakistan, this kind of a circle of countries that obviously might be the next coalition to reign the Middle East, because obviously a regional solution would be much, much better here than United States, at least under this president. So there could be new configuration of alliances, and countries like Kuwait, obviously, need to look for partners in the region rather than to rely on United States.
Professor Popovsky, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much to both of you for joining us today on the broadcast. Always a pleasure to both see you. Now we move to our next update, this time coming out of Australia. Australia's political landscape may be undergoing a significant shift, with the far-right populist One Nation party surging to the top of a national opinion poll for the first time in its history. One Nation has overtaken the ruling Labor Party in primary voting intentions, gaining 4 points over the past month to reach 31%. Labor, led by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, fell 3 points to 28%, while the Conservative coalition dropped to 20%. The poll comes just weeks after the government unveiled its May budget, which included the most sweeping property tax reforms in decades. The changes were designed to address intergenerational inequality and improving housing affordability, but early reaction suggests the measures have failed to win over many voters. The survey found particularly strong opposition among Generation X and baby boomers. Even among younger Australians who stand to benefit from the reforms, support remained weak. Just 26% of millennials and only 13% of Gen Z respondents said the budget would be good for them. Despite its primary vote lead, One Nation still trails Labor on a two-party preferred basis under Australia's ranked choice voting system. Even so, the results signal growing frustration over cost of living pressures, economic uncertainty, and immigration, issues that One Nation has increasingly used to expand its appeal. Now we are joined by Dr. Erin Watson, who's the CEO at Baker & York, and she's joining us from Melbourne in Australia. Dr. Watson, thanks very much for joining us today on NewsX World. A pleasure to have you on the program. We've heard today about an expansion in the first choice vote for One Nation and a collapse in the support for the Conservative coalition. Now we've seen similar phenomenons happen